Dark skin glowing on the stage light, white nose, full lips, eyes that sparkle with something we can only call joy. This is Michael Jackson in 1972, and he is beautiful, undeniably, radiantly, perfectly beautiful. Now look at this one. It's 1995. The skin is pale, almost translucent. The nose is a delicate slope, narrowed to the point of structural fragility. The eyes are lined with black, the cheekbones impossibly high. This is also Michael Jackson, and if you didn't know, you would never believe these two faces belong to the same human being. What happened between these two photographs is not just a story about plastic surgery. It is not even just a story about fame or trauma or the corrosive effects of celebrity on the human psyche. What happened to Michael Jackson's face is something far more profound, far more unsettling, and far more universal than we have been willing to admit. It is a story about what happens when a human being tries to escape himself, when the self becomes unbearable, when the only solution is total annihilation, and then rebirth. This is a story about death and transformation and the terrifying cost of becoming a myth. Before we can understand the man who destroyed his face, we need to understand the boy who learned his face was wrong. Picture this. You're 5 years old. Your father lines you and your brothers up for rehearsal. You sing, you dance, you give everything you have, and when you finish, breathless and hopeful, your father looks at you and says, "You're nothing. Look at that nose. You're ugly." Michael Jackson heard this, not once, not twice, repeatedly, systematically. His father, Joe Jackson, allegedly called him Big Nose, would mock his appearance in front of his brothers, would use his face, his beautiful childlike face, as a weapon of humiliation. Franz Fanon, the revolutionary psychiatrist, wrote about what he called the epidermal racial schema, the moment when a black child realizes their body is seen as a problem, as something deficient, something wrong. Fanon described this as a kind of psychic death, a moment when you stop being a person and become an object under the white gaze. Michael Jackson experienced this one twice over. First, the racism of a society that deemed blackness inferior. Second, the intimate cruelty of a father who internalized that racism and weaponized it against his own son. The boy who sang ABC with such radiant vitality was carrying a wound that would never heal, a wound that said, "Your face is wrong, you are wrong, you will never be loved as you are." And here is what we need to understand. When a child learns this lesson, when it gets inscribed deep into the architecture of their psyche, they don't just develop low self-esteem. They develop something far more dangerous. to develop a compulsion, a mission, a need to destroy the evidence of their wrongness and create something, anything, that might finally be lovable. The late 1970s, Michael Jackson gets his first rhinoplasty. On the surface, this seems unremarkable. Celebrities get nose jobs. It's Hollywood. It's image management. It's fine. But pay attention to what happened next. Because the surgery didn't satisfy the hunger, it intensified it. One rhinoplasty became two, two became three, the nose got thinner, then thinner still. The changes seemed subtle at first, just refinements, just small improvements. But each surgery carried a promise. This time it will be enough. This time you'll finally be acceptable. This time you'll finally be loved. Except it's never enough. It can never be enough. The psychoanalyst Yakis Lucan wrote about something he called object petita, the object cause of desire. It is the thing you think you want, the thing you believe will finally complete you, finally make you whole. But here is the devastating truth. It doesn't exist. It cannot exist because the hunger isn't really about the object. The hunger is the wound itself, endlessly reopening, endlessly demanding to be fed. For Michael Jackson, the perfect phase became his object petita. Each surgery promised to deliver it. Each delivery revealed it was still out of reach. So he went back, again and again and again. The phase became a site of repetition compulsion, that Freudian concept where we return to our traumas, trying desperately to master them, to rewrite the ending. Every time Michael looked in the mirror and saw imperfection, he heard his father's voice. Every surgery was an attempt to silence that voice, to finally become someone his father and the world could love. But you can't outrun your own shadow. You can only keep cutting. There is an astrological archetype that captures this dynamic with eerie precision. Pluto Conjunct the Sun. Now, stay with me here. I'm not asking you to believe in astrology. I'm asking you to understand it as a language, a symbolic system that describes patterns in human experience. The sun represents the self, the ego, the radiant core of who we are. It is identity. It is visibility. It is the light by which we are seen and known. Pluto is the god of the underworld. It is the force that says nothing can remain as it is. Everything must be torn down, destroyed, and remade. Death is not the end, it is only the gateway to transformation. When Pluto meets the Sun, the self cannot remain stable. It must be annihilated and reborn over and over in an endless cycle of death and resurrection. The person living this aspect becomes both destroyer and creator, both victim and architect of their own metamorphosis. Michael Jackson lived this archetype more literally than perhaps any other public figure in history. His face, the most visible symbol of his selfhood, became the stage on which this cosmic drama played out. Every surgery was a small death, every recovery a rebirth. Excuse me, every mirror a confrontation with forces larger than the ego could control. And here is where it gets truly disturbing. The world watched, billions of eyes, endless commentary, constant judgment. His transformation wasn't private, it was the most public self destruction in human history. We watched him die and be reborn again and again, and we called it entertainment. By the time Thriller exploded into the scene in 1982, Michael Jackson was no longer just a person. He was becoming something else, something new. The philosopher John Baudrillard wrote about simulacra, copies without originals, images that replace reality. In late capitalism, Baudrillard argued, we increasingly live in a world of simulation where the image becomes more real than the thing itself. Michael Jackson's face became the ultimate simulacrum. With each surgery, it detached further from its biological origin. It stopped being a face in the normal sense, the stable, inherited marker of identity, and became instead an ongoing project, a work of art under constant revision, a mask that kept changing but never came off. Think about what this means. When you looked at Michael Jackson by the 1990s, what were you seeing? Not a person, not even a modified person. You were seeing pure image, a face that had been so thoroughly reconstructed that it no longer referenced anything natural. It was hyperreal, more than real, beyond real, floating free from biology, from race, from gender, from humanity itself. And this is where the tragedy intensifies. Because for Michael, this wasn't liberation, it was prison. We need to talk about the skin. In 1986, Michael Jackson was diagnosed with vertigo, an autoimmune condition that destroys melanin producing cells, creating patches of big pigmented, pigmented skin. This is not controversial. His autopsy confirmed it. This was a real medical condition. But here is what happened. As the vertigo progressed, Michael used makeup and dermatological treatments to even out the skin. The easiest way to do this was to lighten the remaining pigmented areas to match the depigmented patches. The result? A black man who became white before our eyes, and America lost its mind. The accusations came fast and vicious. He hates himself. He hates his race. He wants to be white. He is betraying black people. He is a race traitor. But let's sit with this for a moment. Really sit with it. Imagine having a disease that steals your skin pigment, that makes your body betray your racial identity against your will. Now imagine being one of the most visible people on earth, having this process happen on camera, under constant scrutiny, with millions of people accusing you of choosing this transformation. The disability studies scholar Rosemary Gallant-Thompson writes about how society demands that bodies be normal, how visible difference is pathologized, how people with disabilities are expected to minimize their difference or face social punishment. Michael was trapped in an impossible double bind. Let the vitiligo progress unevenly and look diseased, or even it out and be accused of racial self-hatred. He chose evenness, and the world never forgave him. Bell Hooks wrote extensively about how black men, especially black male celebrities, exist under what she called the oppositional gaze, the white gaze that demands black bodies perform in specific ways, stay in specific lanes, and never ever transcend the boundaries of racial categorization. Michael Jackson's transforming face and transforming skin violated every rule. He became racially unclassifiable, and in a society still deeply invested in racial categories, this was experienced not as transcendence but as transgression, as threat, as something monstrous. But here is what we can't ignore. Michael Jackson was also an artist, and his body was his canvas. His music videos were not just promotion, they were statements. In Thriller, he literally becomes a monster and then transforms back. In Black or White, the groundbreaking morphing sequence showed faces, different races, different genders flowing into one another, suggesting that identity itself was fluid, mutable, endlessly transformable. That morphing sequence, it wasn't just special effects, it was prophecy. It was showing us what Michael had already been doing to himself, proving that identity could be unmade and remade, that the face was not destiny, that transformation itself could be art. The moonwalk, a signature move, was a perfect metaphor, moving forward while going backward, appearing to defy gravity, existing in a state of pure becoming, never quite landing, never quite being, always in transition. Judith Butler, the philosopher of gender performativity, argues that there is no stable self beneath our performances, that identity is created through repeated acts, through the stylized repetition of gestures, appearances, behaviors. Michael Jackson took this to its logical extreme. He performed identity as pure construction, proving through his own body that nothing is fixed, nothing is given, everything can be unmade. But, and this is critical, Butler's theory is about agency, about choosing your performances. Michael's transformations were never purely chosen. They were driven by compulsion, by trauma, by the wound that never healed. This is his tragedy. What looks like radical freedom was also radical unfreedom. What looked like self-invention was also self-destruction. By the late 1990s, something had shifted. Michael Jackson's face had crossed a threshold. It had entered what roboticists call the uncanny valley. That eerie space where something looks almost human but not quite, triggering deep discomfort in the observer. His features had become so refined, so altered, that they seemed to float free from biological constraints. The nose too narrow, the skin too pale, the chin too sharp, the cheekbones too high. It looked, in a word, impossible. Julia Kristeva wrote about abjection, that feeling of horror and fascination we experience when boundaries dissolve, when we can't tell if something is subject or object, self or other, living or dead. The object is what disturbs identity, system, order. It is the corpse, the wound, the border crossing. Michael Jackson's face had become abject. We could not look away, and we could not look directly at it. It provoked something in us: disgust, pity, fascination, horror, all the emotions we feel when confronted with something that should not exist but does. And Michael himself, he was trapped inside this feast, trapped inside the spectacle, trapped inside the myth he had created but could no longer control. There's another way to read this story, one that is less about tragedy and more about prophecy. Donna Haraway, the feminist theorist, wrote a cyborg manifesto in 1985, arguing that the boundary between human and machine, natural and artificial, was breaking down. The cyborg, she said, was a structure of ambiguity, refusing fixed categories, living in the space between what we think is natural and what we know is constructed. Michael Jackson was a cyborg before we had language for it. His face was part biology, part surgery, part artistic vision, part medical intervention. He was human, and more than human, natural and artificial, black and white, and neither, male and female, and both and neither. Catherine Hales writes about the posthuman, a condition in which we recognize that embodiment is not fixed or contingent, that the body can be endlessly modified, that identity is information that can be rewritten. Michael Jackson lived post-humanism as embodied reality. He proved that the human form was malleable, that race wasn't destiny, that gender could be performed, that even the face, that most intimate marker of self, could be unmade and remade. But here is the question we are left with. Was this liberation or nightmare? Was it showing us the future of human possibility or warning us about its cost? Maybe it's both. June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson dies of acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. Cardiac arrest. He's 50 years old. The body that had undergone so many transformations, that had been cut and reshaped and chemically altered for decades, finally refused to continue. The chronic pain from years of performing, the lupus, the vitiligo, the surgeries, the medications to manage the pain from the surgeries, all of it culminated in a body that could no longer sustain itself. The final transformation was death, the body's ultimate refusal to be remade again. And in that moment, something strange happened. The world that had mocked him, judged him, called him Wako Jacko, and speculated endlessly about his real face, that world suddenly grieved. Millions mourned, because in death he could finally be seen clearly, not as a monster, not as a curiosity, but as a human being who suffered enormously. His death forced us to confront something we had been avoiding, that we had watched the man destroy himself in real time, and we had called it entertainment. Here is the truth about Michael Jackson's fate. It was never really about him. Yes, it was his trauma, his compulsion, his body, his pain, but it was also ours. When we looked at Michael Jackson, we saw our own culture reflected back at us. We saw our racism, the way we police black bodies, the way we punish those who transgress the racial boundaries. We saw our beauty standards, the Eurocentric ideals that deem thin noses and light skin more valuable. We saw our celebrity worship, the way we consume famous people, the way we demand their constant visibility while punishing them for being visible. We saw our relationship to artifice and authenticity, our anxieties about plastic surgery, about the line between self improvement and self destruction, our questions about identity. Is it fixed or fluid, given or chosen, nature or construction? Michael Jackson's face asked us, what are you willing to destroy to be loved? How far will you go to escape yourself? And when you finally succeed in becoming someone else, what have you actually won? These aren't just his questions, they are ours. They are everyone's who's ever felt inadequate, who has ever wanted to be someone else, who has ever looked in the mirror and seen a problem instead of a person. The difference is that most of us don't have the resources to act on that impulse to the degree Michael did. We don't have access to unlimited surgery. We can't literally reconstruct our faces. We are forced to make peace with what we have. Michael Jackson never had to make peace. He had the money, the fame, the access to do what most of us can only fantasize about, become someone completely new, and it destroyed him. In Greek mythology, the phoenix burns itself to ashes and is reborn from the flames. It is a symbol of transformation, of death and resurrection, of the eternal cycle of destruction and renewal. Michael Jackson's face was a phoenix. It burned down and rose again, over and over, each iteration less recognizable than the last. But here is what the myth doesn't tell you: what it feels like to burn, what it costs, what is lost in the flames. The myth makes it sound transcendent, beautiful, necessary. The reality was a man in chronic pain, addicted to painkillers, isolated, lonely, trapped inside a face that had become more famous than the person wearing it. The myth is what to remember. The suffering is what he lived. So what do we do with this story? We could pathologize it. Say Michael Jackson was mentally ill, that he had body dysmorphia, that he needed help he never got. And there's truth in that. We could racialize it and say this is what happens when a black person internalizes white supremacy, when self hatred becomes literal self destruction. And there's truth in that too. We could theorize it, say he was a posthuman prophet showing us the future of identity as construction, as performance, as endless malleability. And yes, there's truth in that as well. But maybe the real lesson is simpler and more devastating. You cannot outrun your own shadow. You cannot destroy the wound by destroying the body. You cannot become lovable by becoming someone else. Because the wound isn't in the face. It never was. It is deeper. It is in the place where you first learned you were wrong. It is in the voice that said you were not enough. It is in the gaze that turned you from a person into a problem. And no amount of surgery can touch that wound. No transformation can heal it. Because it is not about what you look like, it is about what you believe you deserve. Today, Michael Jackson's face exists in fragments, in photographs, in videos, in the memories of those who watched this transformation, in the debates that still rage about what it meant, what it means, what we should make of it. The boy from Gary, Indiana is gone. The man he became is gone. What remains is the image, eternal, unchanging, endlessly reproducible. His face has become what it was always becoming, a myth, a symbol, a mirror in which we see ourselves. And when you look at that face, at any of those faces, from any era of his transformation, what you are really seeing is a question. What would you destroy to be loved? And more importantly, what would you save? Michael Jackson destroyed his face to create a myth, but the myth couldn't save him because myths don't bleed, they don't hurt, they don't need painkillers to sleep at night. Only humans do. And underneath the myth, the simulacrum, the hyperreal image, the posthuman cyborg, the abject uncanny, underneath all of it was just a man who was told his face was wrong, who believed it, who spent his life trying to fix it, who never learned that he was always already enough. That is the tragedy. That is the lesson. That is the story we have been afraid to tell. Michael Jackson's face asks us to look, to really look at the cost of transformation, at what we lose when we cannot accept what we are, at the violence